When millionaire Richard Langford decided to go undercover as a construction worker in his own company, he thought he'd simply observe the daily grind. What he discovered, however, was a nightmare unfolding beneath his leadership: unsafe conditions, abusive supervisors, and workers living in fear. As Rick Lewis, he faced the harsh realities of his employees' lives and realized how disconnected he had become from the foundation of his empire. With each passing day, Richard's horror grew, fueling an inner resolve to make things right. What began as a disguised investigation turned into a personal mission to transform his company and rebuild trust. But could he undo years of neglect and create the change his workers desperately needed? The morning sun broke over the bustling construction site, casting long shadows across the steel beams and piles of gravel. Among the workers donning dusty jeans and faded hard hats, one stood out not because of his appearance, but because of who he truly was. Richard Langford, a self-made millionaire and CEO of Langford Enterprises, was standing anonymously among his employees, disguised as a construction worker. What brought him here wasn't curiosity, but a deep suspicion that something was terribly wrong in his company. Langford Enterprises was a renowned construction firm with projects spanning the globe. Richard had built it from the ground up, but as the company grew, so did the distance between him and the day-to-day operations. Recently, anonymous complaints had started trickling in allegations of unsafe work conditions, unfair pay, and abusive supervisors. Wanting to see the truth with his own eyes, Richard had made a bold decision to go undercover and experience life as one of his employees. He had spent weeks preparing. With the help of a trusted associate, he created a false identity, donned worn work clothes, and adopted the name Rick Lewis. The foreman, unaware of Rick's true identity, welcomed him to the crew with little fanfare. "Keep your head down, work hard, and you'll be fine," the foreman grumbled before turning away. From the first hour on site, Richard realized how little he understood about the daily struggles of his workers. The tools provided were outdated, and safety gear was scarce. Workers exchanged knowing glances when discussing shortcuts to meet deadline shortcuts that clearly compromised safety. One worker, Carlos, warned him, "Stick to the job, Rick. Don't ask too many questions, or you'll find yourself out of work." As the day progressed, Richard's horror grew. The foreman barked orders at the crew, pushing them to complete tasks in record time, regardless of the risks. When a young worker slipped while carrying a heavy load, the foreman shouted, "Get back up! We don't have time for breaks." No one dared to protest, and Richard saw the fear in their eyes. At lunch, Richard sat with a group of workers who shared their frustrations in hushed tones. "We haven't seen a raise in years," one of them said. "And if you get injured, good luck getting any help. They'll find a way to fire you before you can file a claim." Another added, "It's not the company, it's the management. They don't care about us, just the bottom line." Richard's chest tightened with guilt. This was his company, his responsibility. How had he allowed things to spiral out of control? Over the next few days, Richard continued to witness the harsh realities of life on the site. He saw workers being forced to operate heavy machinery without proper training, putting themselves and others in danger. He overheard a supervisor threatening to dock pay for anyone who couldn't meet the impossible quotas. And he learned of a worker who had been fired after raising concerns about a faulty crane that were ignored until the crane finally collapsed, thankfully, without casualties. One evening, Richard stayed late to clean up the site, hoping to collect his thoughts. He noticed a young man sitting alone, nursing a bruised hand. "What happened?" Richard asked. The young man hesitated before answering. "I got hurt using one of the old drills. Told the foreman, but he said if I can't work, I might as well quit." Richard clenched his fists. This wasn't just negligence, it was outright abuse. He made a silent vow to set things right. By the end of the week, Richard had gathered enough information to confront the management team overseeing the site. But first, He wanted to hear directly from the workers. On his last day as Rick, he gathered a small group during their lunch break. "If you could change one thing about this job, what would it be?" he asked. The answers came quickly: better safety measures, fair pay, respect from supervisors. One worker summed it up: "We just want to be treated like human beings, not machines." That night, Richard shed his disguise and returned to his office as the CEO of Langford Enterprises. He called an emergency meeting with the senior management team responsible for the construction division. His voice was calm but firm as he recounted his experiences. "I went undercover to see how our workers are treated," he said. "What I saw was unacceptable." The room fell silent. Some managers looked shocked, others defensive. One tried to downplay the situation, saying, "Construction is a tough industry. These issues are common." Richard's gaze hardened. Common doesn't make it right. These are people's lives we're talking about. If we don't fix this, we're not just risking lawsuits, we're betraying the trust of every employee who works for us. He outlined a series of immediate changes, replacing outdated equipment, implementing comprehensive safety training, increasing wages, and establishing an anonymous hotline for workers to report issues without fear of retaliation. He also announced that the abusive foreman and negligent supervisors would be dismissed, with their replacements coming from within the workforce, people who truly understood the challenges of the job. Word of the changes spread quickly. At first, the workers were skeptical, but as the new policies were implemented, morale began to improve. Richard made it a point to visit the site regularly, this time as himself, to ensure that the reforms were upheld. He spoke directly with the workers, asking for their feedback and making it clear that their voices mattered. One day, Carlos approached him. "I didn't recognize you without the hard hat," he said with a grin. "But I gotta say, things are a lot better around here. Thanks for listening." Richard smiled. "It's the least I can do. You all deserve it." The experience had changed Richard forever. He realized that being a leader wasn't just about making decisions from the top. It was about understanding the people who built the foundation of the company. He had been horrified by what he saw as a construction worker, but that horror had fueled a determination to create a company that valued its employees as much as its profits. Years later, Langford Enterprises became known not just for its impressive projects, but for its commitment to worker welfare. And every time Richard visited a site, he remembered the days he spent as Rick Lewis, the undercover worker who rediscovered the true meaning of leadership